the silence of the deep space was broken by a signal. Weak, fragmented, and barely perceptible, it drifted through the cold void between the stars, bouncing off the edges of a forgotten corner of the galaxy. On board the mining vessel Endeavour, a crew of Varelian explorers was far from anticipating anything other than the routine collection of precious minerals from the distant moons of the gas giant Calypso. But something was different this time. The ship's sensors, tuned to detect nothing but mineral deposits and cosmic radiation, had picked up an anomaly, a signal coming from the outermost reaches of the solar system, right at the edge of the Kuiper Belt. It was faint, like an old voice trying to speak from the grave, barely strong enough to break through the background noise of space. The ship's captain, Riker D. Vallon, stood hunched over the signal screen in his command cabin. His sharp eyes studied the blip on the radar, not fully understanding what he was seeing. He could tell it was unlike any usual communication. His mind buzzed with possibilities. Could it be an encrypted message from a long-lost civilization? A distress call from some long-forgotten colony? Or worse, an automatic signal from a dangerous weapon of some sort? "Bring it up to the main deck," Riker ordered, his voice steady but with a hint of curiosity. His crew scrambled to obey, the ship vibrating as the ancient signal pulsed louder, reverberating through their equipment like a whisper from an alien past. As the Endeavour drifted closer to the source, the signal's frequency became clearer. A voice, soft, almost human, echoed through the ship's comm system. "Earth. This is Earth. Please, help." The words were scrambled, distorted by years of travel through space, but they were unmistakable. Earth. The birthplace of humanity. The name stirred something in Riker. Earth was a place he thought had long since vanished, a casualty of the collapse wars centuries ago. No one had heard from it in generations, and now an SOS? The thought sent a chill through his spine. What could have survived on Earth for so long? Why would a distress signal, so old and faint, still be alive? The crew watched in stunned silence as the signal strengthened, the voice now clearer, yet still broken and fragmented. Ready. For. Prepare. The words were cut off by static, but the urgency was undeniable. "What are we dealing with here?" First Officer Kayla Lauren asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "It could be anything, Riker. A trap, a mistake, or something worse." Riker's fingers drummed the surface of the console, lost in thought. There was no immediate danger yet, but his instincts told him that something was wrong. "Let's investigate," he finally decided. "Plot a course for the signal source." As they neared the coordinates, the sensor readings grew stranger. The signal was emanating from a moon of Neptune, a place most people had forgotten existed. Riker had heard rumors, ancient, half-forgotten legends about secret bases, buried deep beneath ice and rock. But surely those were just stories, right? Stories told in the dark corners of bars or by the fire, where no one cared about the truth anymore. The moon itself had been marked as uninhabited on all the star maps for centuries. Yet here it was, sending a call to the stars, a plea for help. The Endeavour descended through Neptune's thick clouds, cutting through them like a knife through butter. Below, in the icy depths of the moon's surface, something glinted. As they approached the surface, the crew saw that it wasn't just a natural formation, but a structure metal, old and crumbling. The ship's instruments were unable to make sense of it. There were no readings that matched anything known in the galaxy. It was an enigma. Riker felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The signal had come from this place, and there was no turning back now. "Prepare to land," Riker commanded, his voice steady but with a strange urgency. The Endeavour touched down on the moon's surface with a quiet hum, and the crew donned their suits, readying themselves to explore whatever secrets lay beneath the cold, desolate surface. They had no idea what they were about to awaken. The moment the landing hatch opened, a rush of stale air greeted them, as if the place had been locked away from the universe for millennia. The smell of old metal and decaying tech hung in the air. Their footsteps echoed through the vast underground cavern as they navigated the narrow hallways, lit only by their torches. The walls were covered in strange, alien symbols, human symbols, Riker realized with a jolt. He knew those shapes. He had seen them in history books, buried deep in the archives of forgotten Earth. The markings were unmistakable. They belonged to the ancient human civilization, to a time long before the collapse. This was a human-built structure, and it was still alive. They followed the signal, moving deeper into the bowels of the structure until they came to a massive door. The metal was thick and weathered, and yet, as they approached, there was a faint glow coming from the cracks. The signal was coming from beyond this door. The crew hesitated for a moment, unsure if they should open it. But then, as if on instinct, Riker stepped forward, placing his hand on the cold surface. The door hissed open, revealing a dark, vast chamber. At the center stood a massive, humanoid shape, something made of metal, but pulsing with strange, living energy. The crew was stunned. It was one of them, one of the giants, a war titan. And it was still alive. ASA, the hatch of the massive chamber slowly opened. A cold gust of stale, metallic air swept out. The crew of the Endeavor stood frozen at the threshold. Before them, towering in the dim light, was something that could only be described as an ancient war machine, huge and silent, yet pulsing with an eerie energy. The structure was humanoid in shape, but far more than just a machine. Its surface gleamed, covered in intricate designs that seemed to shift and change the longer they looked at it. The air around it hummed, like the faint sound of a distant engine turning over. For a moment, it felt as if the whole room was alive, breathing, waiting. "Is it alive?" First Officer Kayla Lauren whispered, her voice barely audible. She took a cautious step forward, her boots making no sound against the smooth metal floor. Riker, the captain, hesitated, his mind racing with the possibilities. The structure in front of them looked like nothing they'd seen before. It wasn't just an old relic. It was something more. Something that had been built with a purpose. And that purpose was still waiting to be revealed. Riker stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "Whatever it is, we need to wake it up," he said, his voice steady but tense. The signal had come from here, from this very place. Whatever it was, whatever had left that ancient call for help, was trapped inside this towering construct. He had no idea what kind of machine this was, but his instincts told him that it was far from ordinary. The crew moved in closer, their torches casting long shadows on the walls. The War Titan's eyes, if they could be called eyes, were dark, lifeless orbs, but there was something unsettling about them, as if they could see, even in their dormancy. The whole machine seemed to be made from a combination of metal and something else, something organic, like the line between machine and living being had blurred long ago. Kayla took a cautious step forward, reaching out to touch the surface of the Titan. Her fingers barely brushed the metal when there was a sudden jolt. The entire room seemed to vibrate, a low hum rising from the depths of the Titan. Riker stepped back, his breath catching in his throat. Something was happening. Something was awakening. The Titan's body shuddered, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a loud hiss, the machine's arms began to move, slowly at first, then faster, as if shaking off years of slumber. Its massive hands twitched, flexing like fingers waking up after a long, cold sleep. The lights inside the chamber flickered, casting wild shadows across the walls. The crew gasped, instinctively drawing back, but they couldn't look away. "What the hell is it doing?" Kayla asked, her voice tight with fear. The Titan's legs started to shift, its joints creaking as they rotated, the metal grinding against itself. Slowly, it began to rise, standing taller and taller until its enormous form loomed above the humans. Every movement was slow and deliberate, like the creature was testing its strength, relearning its own power. The air around them crackled with energy as the Titan system powered up, circuits humming to life. Its eyes, now glowing faintly, scanned the room, focusing on the crew. The crew stood motionless, unsure of what to do, fear and awe freezing them in place. The Titan's head tilted slightly to the side, as if studying them. The noise from its internal systems was deafening now, like 1,000 machines coming online all at once. Riker's mind raced. This was no simple war machine. This was something that had been built for a purpose far beyond anything he could imagine. Was it human-made? Or had it been constructed by something else, Something that had learned from humans? The signal Earth's final plea for help had been sent out decades, even centuries ago. How could it still be alive? And why had it remained hidden for so long? Focus, everyone, Riker snapped, trying to maintain some level of control. We need to understand this. We have no idea what this thing is capable of. It could be a weapon, or it could be the key to something much bigger. He turned to the crew. Kayla, get the scanners running. I want a full diagnostic of whatever's inside this thing. We need answers. Kayla nodded quickly, moving toward the control panel on the far side of the room. As she activated the scanners, the Titan's movements became more coordinated. It took a slow step forward, its massive feet making the floor tremble beneath them. It reached out with one hand, fingers curling as it grasped at the air, as if trying to find something familiar. There was something almost human in its movements now, like it was searching for a connection. And then the voice came. Not through the comms, but inside their heads. A low, guttural sound filled with static and distortion, but unmistakably human. The voice was fragmented, as if it had been broken apart by time itself, but it carried an unmistakable message. Prepare. Ready. Earth. Protect. The words were like echoes, fading in and out, but the meaning was clear. This was not just a machine. This was a guardian. A protector built to defend Earth if, or when, the need ever arose. The crew exchanged nervous glances. It wasn't just an old relic, a forgotten weapon. It was alive. Or at least it was as close to alive as anything they had ever encountered. They had awakened something that had been slumbering for centuries, perhaps longer. They had disturbed the final remnants of humanity's last line of defense. Riker stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with awe. We've done it. We've found the giants. The words felt strange coming out of his mouth, but they were true. They had found the war machines of a dead civilization. And now they were awake. What happens now? Kayla asked, her voice filled with fear and wonder. She looked at the Titan as it continued to stand, its massive frame glowing faintly with energy. It was waiting, watching, listening for something, perhaps a command, perhaps a signal, perhaps a purpose long forgotten. Riker didn't know what would happen next. But he knew one thing. They had just awoken something far more dangerous than they could ever understand. And Earth was no longer the only thing that mattered. The Titans had returned, and with them came a new chapter in humanity's forgotten history. What role would the crew of the Endeavour play in it? That was a question they would soon find out. The moment the Titan systems fully powered up, the quiet of the chamber was shattered by a violent tremor, followed by a deep, vibrating hum that echoed throughout the structure. The Titan's body twitched, every movement precise, almost mechanical, as if it had been programmed for this exact moment. Its colossal form, which had seemed dormant and lifeless just moments ago, now radiated a terrifying power. The crew of the Endeavour watched in stunned silence as it fully rose, its massive head swiveling to face them. For a second, it felt like the world had stopped, as if everything in the universe was holding its breath. Then, without warning, the Titan's massive arm shot forward, its fingers curling in a clenched fist, and a blinding pulse of light exploded from its chest. The energy blast was so powerful that it sent a shockwave through the air, knocking the crew off their feet. Sparks flew from the walls, and the ship's internal systems screamed in protest as alarms blared across the Endeavour. Riker struggled to regain his footing, his heart racing as the reality of the situation began to sink in. The Titan wasn't just a relic, it was a weapon. And it was activated. Get to the ship, Riker barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. We need to get out of here now. The crew scrambled to their feet, racing for the exit, but the ground beneath them shook violently again. The Titan's movements were growing more fluid, more aggressive, as if it was testing its own strength. Its glowing eyes flashed, and another pulse of energy erupted from its chest, this time aimed directly at the ceiling above them. The structure above cracked and splintered, and chunks of debris fell, blocking their path. Captain, we need to leave now, Kayla shouted, pulling Riker by the arm. The Titan was still firing, its powerful energy beams tearing through the ceiling and walls with ease. Its attacks weren't just random. They were calculated, precise. This machine, this Guardian, had been designed for total destruction, and it was taking its first steps back into a world it had long since forgotten. Riker glanced over his shoulder, his heart racing as the Titan's next pulse of energy blew a hole clean through the ceiling, sending dust and metal flying. The ship's engines roared to life, and they were quickly lifted off the ground, but not before another shot from the Titan nearly tore the Endeavor apart. The ship lurched, throwing the crew off balance, but Riker clung to the controls, his eyes fixed on the growing destruction behind them. In the distance, above the surface of the moon, he saw it. Dozens of ships, sleek and menacing, appeared from behind the shadow of Neptune, their forms illuminated by the light of the distant stars. They were massive warships, unmistakably Varelian in design. Riker's mind raced. The Endeavor was no match for the firepower of the Varelian fleet. They had been discovered. And now, they were not only facing an ancient weapon that had been dormant for centuries, but an entire fleet of invaders that had come to silence whatever had been awakened on this forgotten moon. "We're not alone," Riker said, his voice grim as he turned toward Kayla. "They're here. The Varelians are coming." Kayla's face went pale as she stared out the window, her eyes locked on the descending fleet. They were too close. There was no time to run. Riker didn't hesitate. He slammed his fist against the comm panel, reaching out to the Titan below them. "Listen to me," he shouted into the comms. "We need you. Earth needs you now." He didn't know if the Titan could hear him, if it even understood what he was saying, but he had to try. There was no time for second-guessing. The Titan had been created to defend Earth, to protect humanity from whatever might come. But was it still capable of doing that? Would it even listen? To his surprise, the Titan's head snapped toward the sky, its glowing eyes narrowing as it seemed to sense the incoming threat. A deep rumble came from the Titan's chest, and then, without warning, it began to move fast. The ground beneath it cracked as it launched itself into the air, propelling itself upward with an incredible force. Riker's heart skipped a beat as he watched the Titan rise, its colossal form cutting through the atmosphere like a meteor. Behind it, the Varelian ships were descending rapidly, their weapons glowing bright as they locked onto the Endeavor. The crew could see the missiles launching, streaking through the sky toward them. Riker's mind raced. He had seconds to make a decision. "Kayla, get the shields up. We need to hold them off long enough for the Titan to get close," Riker shouted. The Endeavor's shields flared to life as the crew braced for impact. The Varelian fleet opened fire. Blinding beams of energy slammed into the ship's shields, sending violent tremors through the hull. The ship shuddered as it took hit after hit, each blow rattling the crew as they clung to their seats. But then, just as the Varelian ships moved into range, the Titan launched itself at them, faster than Riker had ever thought possible. It collided with the lead ship with a deafening crash, its massive fists punching through the Varelian hull like paper. Sparks flew as the ship was torn apart, and then, with a single powerful motion, the Titan ripped the entire ship in two, sending debris flying into the blackness of space. The remaining Varelian ships scattered, firing everything they had at the Titan. But the Titan was unstoppable. It moved with incredible speed, dodging blasts and countering with devastating strikes of its own. It tore through the fleet one ship at a time, each explosion lighting up the darkness of space like 1,000 fireworks. The air was filled with the sound of explosions, the crackle of energy, and the screams of dying ships as they were torn apart by the Titan's unrelenting assault. Riker's eyes widened in shock as he watched the Titan's wrath. This was the last of humanity's defenses, the last line of protection, and it was tearing through the Varelian fleet like a storm. In that moment, he realized the true power of what they had awakened. The Titan wasn't just a machine. It was humanity's vengeance. It was their answer to anyone who dared to challenge them. And as the final Varelian ship was torn apart, Riker couldn't help but feel a deep, unsettling sense of finality. Earth had been forgotten, its legacy buried beneath layers of time and war. But now, it had been awakened, and nothing would stop it. The silence that followed the destruction of the Varelian fleet was deafening. The stars outside the Endeavor's cockpit window were once again still, but the crew's minds were racing, hearts pounding in the aftermath of the chaos. They had just witnessed a force beyond anything they had ever imagined. The Titan had not only defended them, but had wiped out an entire fleet of the most advanced warships in the galaxy. And yet, as they floated in the emptiness of space, there was still an unsettling feeling in the air, like the calm before a storm. Riker sat in the cockpit, his fingers drumming nervously on the controls, staring out into the void. His mind couldn't shake the image of the Titan's relentless destruction. It had been like a waking nightmare.